Who the hell can wait till morning? Talk now at latenightsportsradio.com.
It's halftime on most of your seasons in fantasy football. It's the Week 7 edition of the Starts and Sits in 60 Minutes, powered by www.thefantasygreek.com. Welcome to the program, everybody. I am Keith Gree from 87 Sports Fans, and joined, as always, by the Fantasy Greek himself, Jim Serantias. Jim, happy Wednesday.
Keith, happy Wednesday. It's a good night for all of us who are Cub fans.
Yes, the Midwest is rejoicing because they have another reason to not have to watch the Bears for another week. Sorry, I tried to slip a little football humor in there.
Well, I laughed.
Thank God. And if you did, then who knows? Everybody else must be somewhere. So, folks, if you're new to the program, the way this works, Jim and I will go through every Week 7 matchup in the NFL and tell you who you should be starting and who you should be avoiding like the plague. If at any time you want to interject and disrupt the monotony with your own lineup issue, the phone number here is 585-633-7487. That number again is 585-633-7487. Jim, it's time for the cold question of the week. It's becoming a tradition. What stood out from you last week? For you last week, what pissed you off and what surprised you pleasantly?
Well, I'm all about the negativity in fantasy football because, I just get outraged at certain things. And the thing I'm most outraged about is the Miami Dolphins touting that Arian Foster was back, but he wasn't really back. And then Jay just blowing up the gridiron in fantasy football as he floundered on people's benches, or more than likely the waiver wire. It just was so upsetting. I mean, I'm happy for him. Don't get me wrong. I mean, I think it's great for JJ. It's great for the Dolphins. But when you're a fantasy football prognosticator, it's the kind of thing that just drives you wacky.
Yeah, and I actually did have an owner in my Dynasty League that actually started Jay. I was like, major props to you, sir, because you just hit the mother load.
Wow, did he really? That is amazing.
Yeah, he did.
Utterly amazing. And then I suppose if there was a good thing, what was the good thing? I guess Jacquizz Rodgers, that was a pleasant surprise. I know you benefited.
Yeah. I personally was a big fan of Odell Beckham Jr. returning to the fantasy relevance.
Yeah, and it was because I can't tell you how many fantasy owners I have sat here and talked off the ledge for the last past several weeks, just telling them, please, don't trade him. Just hang in there. He's going to bounce back. It's, we've got more games than ahead of us than behind us. So
it was a tempting ledge. I'm just going to throw that out.
Yeah, I suppose. And thankfully, he's got another good matchup this week.
That's right. That is right.
And Cameron Meredith. I want to throw that name out there.
Yeah, he's becoming a beast
for
the Chicago Bears.
I would, I don't know, the leagues I'm in, I made sure to scoop him up wherever he was available. And if there are people sitting there right now and you see him on the waiver wire, you go get him because I think he's the real deal.
I got to say, though, if you're in a league where guys like Cameron Meredith or Jordan Howard are still available, who are you playing with? Who are these people?
Well, it could be a 10-team league or it could be an 8-team league. I mean, it does happen. It sometimes in certain size leagues, it's difficult to, even the tempting guys to be rostered. But I try to get them.
There you go, sticking up for the little guy again.
I mean, look, I think I mentioned this last week, and I'll say it again. It's always good to sit back and if you follow waiver wires, certainly if you follow us in our injury report. I mean, even today, LaShawn McCoy got pulled from practice because of his hamstring. Immediately, if you're one of these fantasy team owners that has been decimated by injuries, you should be going, who's his backup? Maybe I ought to go roster that guy and go get yourself Mike Gillislee, or Carlos Hyde isn't playing this weekend. Run out and go get Mike Davis, or as I mentioned, Doug Martin is not going to play. In fact, Doug Martin might be out for a few weeks. So, if Jacquizz Rodgers is on your roster and you're one of those people that's just been struggling here, go get him.
Yeah, especially with Sims on IR. That's an absolute must pick up. Can I ask you a question really quick? With the Eagles all of a sudden, kind of coming back to earth, are you off the Wentzylvania wagon? Are you returning the Eagles from whence they came? How many Wentz jokes can I?
That really deserves a certain amount of time, I suppose, to answer and to acknowledge. And no, I'm not. I will tell you that his schedule after this week will begin to lighten up. This week they play the Vikings, and they're going up against the Cowboys, who are a little bit banged up. Then the Giants, who are a little bit banged up. Then the Falcons, who, are giving away fantasy points. Then they hit the Seahawks. Okay, fine. You're going to have to bench them that week. But after that, Packers, Bengals, Redskins, that could be an interesting game. And then Ravens, that depends. Giants, that should be a good matchup. So I'm not off of it. His value is definitely schedule sensitive.
All right, last week, as far as our little pick'em competition went, I made up some big ground. Managed to pick 10 games right, and as opposed to your 7, which puts the season standings at you with 51 and me with 47. It was a much needed rally week there before the season unraveled on me. Games that we were both wrong on. We both picked the Bears to beat the Jaguars. That was a really disappointing game. And not just because I'm a Bears fan. If you're a football fan, the Chicago was at home, had a decent lead in the fourth quarter, and just couldn't get it done. Close out that game. We both had picked the Pittsburgh Steelers to beat the Miami Dolphins. That was a game I did not see coming at all. We both picked the Eagles to beat the Redskins. We both picked the Raiders to beat the Chiefs. The Chiefs are one of those teams that just when you want to kick them, you can count them out. They put out a performance that makes you look like a fool. And we both picked the Packers to beat the Cowboys, and that will lead to some discussion when we get to their matchup. They're on a bye this week, I believe. But talking about whether or not Tony Romo will be the guy or not, and if you're a Tony Romo owner, what do you do? But without further ado, let's launch into Week 7, and let's start with the Thursday primetime matchup, the Chicago Bears at the Green Bay Packers. Why the NFL wants to put the Bears in prime time, it has to have something to do with some kind of small fine print detail that was left in George Halas's will, because there's no reason to watch this team at all. They're awful on defense. Brian Hoyer has been a pleasant surprise, but if you watch that game or the closing moments of that Jacksonville game, he is not the answer. You look at how these teams match up statistic-wise, actually the Bears outgained the Packers. Speak to what the drop-off that Aaron Rodgers and company have seen offensively this year. The Bears outgained them by about 40 yards a game, 35 yards a game. And more so 60 yards almost in the passing game, which just blows my mind. The Packers do score more points, and they are much better on third down. Defensively, very even yardage-wise. Scoring defense, very similar, as well as third down. The problem for the Bears is they get gashed on the ground. They're giving up 107 yards per game. The Packers had been lights out, but they really hadn't faced a decent running back until last week when they faced Ezekiel Elliott and the Dallas Cowboys, and they did show some vulnerability there. Bad news for the Packers, though. Eddie Lacy is out indefinitely. I don't think James Starks is a what's the word I'm looking for? Valuable asset. They went and signed, what's his name?
Nile Davis, and James Starks is out.
Yeah, James Starks is out. So Nile Davis is going to be the guy, apparently, with Randall Cobb probably taking some snaps back there.
Ty Montgomery.
Yeah, and Ty Montgomery, thank you. It just doesn't bode well. This game is home for Green Bay. It's a Thursday night game. The Bears have nothing going on. But if there's any team that will make the Packers all of a sudden be right, it's this Bears defense. I'm not buying anything Chicago's putting up. It's in Green Bay, prime time. I'm picking the Packers.
Yeah, I'm going to stick with the Packers, too, even though I've said this before. Vic Fangio, I think, has Aaron Rodgers' number. But The problem with this game is it will become a purely passing game for the Packers. I mean, the only other person besides Niall Davis is Ty Montgomery. He'll probably get 6 to 10, rushing carries, or, a combination of rushing and receiving out of the backfield. And Niall Davis might get a couple just to sort of, see what it looks like to run behind a bunch of guys wearing green and yellow as opposed to red, white. So this is going to be Aaron Rodgers airing the ball out probably 50 times. The Bears defense, I'm over the course of a 60-minute game, they're going to tire. But what that also is going to mean is the Bears offense is going to air the football out. I like every player in this game in terms of fantasy. I mean, Aaron Rodgers, you got to start him. Jordy Nelson, Randall Cobb. Ty Montgomery makes for a wide receiver 3 in deeper leagues and a flex play in standard 10 or 12 team leagues. For the Bears, Brian Hoyer should, get another 300-yard game, 2 to 3 TDs. Alshon Jeffrey is going to score a touchdown this week, I'm predicting. The Packers have 3 of their starting defensive backs injured, and they will all miss the game. I mean, there's nothing here. So I sort of like this game as an upset special. The Bears upset the Packers last year in Lambeau Field. Except there, I think it was a 17-15 game, and this game is going to be probably 55 points scored combined by both teams. So I'd take the over on the 50-point, whatever the cutoff is. It's probably 50 points. And but I'm gonna stick with the Packers because this is where Aaron Rodgers should thrive. But I think the Bears are they're gonna fight this one to the end.
All right, the New York Giants travel to London to take on the Los Angeles Rams. To our friends across the pond, I apologize. You had to watch the Colts and Jaguars earlier. Now you have to watch the Giants and the Rams. None of these are the upper echelon of the NFL by any stretch of the imagination. Trying to pick this game. Last week, Eli Manning and Odell Beckham had a second half of the ages for the ages last year in a 27-23 win. At home versus the Baltimore Ravens. The Rams losing on the road 31-28 to the Detroit Lions. So, looking at how these teams match up, they both score similarly offensively. They both allow the same defensively. This is going to be this has the makings to be an illustrious 9-6 game here, folks. Just what we want to show off to the world with a game in England. Maybe 17-14, just to make it, touchdowns are better than field goals, right, guys? They sell better. Touchdowns sell. Jeez. I'm going to go with the big momentum here on offense and Eli and Odell. I'm going to say that hopefully this is a first step to them finding their mojo again, and I'm going to pick the Giants in this game.
Yeah, I think the Giants in this one is that's clearly the team to select here. And I mean, in part, let's just consider the simple idea of the travel. Less travel compared to the LA Rams. The Giants are a team that's offense. They're coming off a huge high. I'm not going to play down Casey Keenum's fantastic game, which, by the way, I called in my Deep Sleeper article on usatoday.com. Go check that out. It's usually out Thursday afternoons. This is a game where there's a few guys I like. I like Eli Manning. I don't think he's a top start, obviously. If you might have a couple of the guys that we're recommending, like a Brian Hoyer or something like that, you might want to consider. But Odell Beckham Jr., I think you have to start him. I think you can consider Sterling Shepard in a deeper league. He hasn't been as impressive as I think many of us have wanted. You keep starting Todd Gurley, and the guy that is very quietly, and I have to give him some props this week. A guy that's very quietly he's going to have a solid season at the pace that he's going. Kenny Britt for the Rams. I want to say he's pacing 1,300 yards. It's really crazy. And, you would have never thought about a player like this who seemed pretty washed up after he had come from the Titans and really hasn't done much with the Rams up until this point. But he's averaging, 80 to 100 yards per game. He finally had a couple of touchdowns last week. So if you picked him up off the waiver wire like we recommended that you do, go ahead and give him a start this week. There should be a decent amount of points put up on the board. All
right. The Cleveland Browns travel to the Cincinnati Bengals in an AFC North showdown. The Browns and Bengals, might be surprised to know that they score just about the same amount of points per game offensively. In fact, the Browns actually average 0.6 points more per game than the Bengals. Who would have thunk that going into this season? Defensively, though, the neither team is really stout, but the Browns rather are almost at 30 points allowed per game. Last week, the Bengals losing 35-17 to the New England Patriots. The Browns losing a heartbreaker in Tennessee, 28-26, in a game where Marcus Mariota had a pretty decent game, and the Browns were still there kicking and screaming. This is a game where when I'm trying to roll the dice like I do, Riverboat Keith, if you will, if the Browns were at home, I would take the Browns on a whim. But because the Bengals are at home, I'm going to take Cincinnati in an interdivisional matchup.
This should be a get-right game for the Bengals, and it's nothing against the Browns. It's just their defense has been struggling all season. I mean, they've been sort of the punching bag in fantasy football. If your players are up against them, you start them. But the one thing that could be a huge factor into making A.J. Dalton, I mean, he's a stardom this week. In our stardoms list, which you go to thefantasygreek.com. We've got them quarterbacks, running backs, wide receivers out. I should be able to get tight ends later on tonight, and obviously tomorrow we'll get the rest out, such as the defenses. But Tyler Eifert, it looks like he's coming back this week. It's not for certain, but if he does, it's going to change the dynamic of this team. Suddenly, Andy Dalton gets his huge red zone target back. I mean, he should get multiple TDs, regardless of whether or not Eifert plays. But if he does, it just makes everything more certain. So go ahead and you can start A.J. Dalton this week as a low-end QB1. A.J. Green is always a must-start. If Eifert gets the opportunity to play, start him. I also like Gio Bernard, who he was pretty much the starter last week, and he got the majority of touches between himself and Jeremy Hill, and I think that will continue into this week. For the Browns, Gary Barnidge still remains one of the better tight ends, as well as one of the top options in their offense. I like Isaiah Crowell this week as sort of a mid-range RB2. And if Terrell Pryor plays, I think you got to consider him because the Bengals do give up a wide receiver touchdown pretty much every single game, and I can't think of anybody else who'll get it but him. But I'm going to take Cincinnati at home.
All right, the Washington Redskins travel to the Detroit Lions. This is a game pretty evenly matched from all angles here, offensively and defensively in every major statistical category. They're within the neighborhood of each other, except for Washington runs the ball offensively a little bit better. So looking at this, somebody on this one of the hosts of these shows picked up Golden Tate at 11:40 a.m. Sunday morning. Last week. I'm not saying who it was, but he's incredibly handsome and made out like a bandit here. Like I said, this is an even matchup, and in these where I don't really like either team to have an advantage in any aspect of the game, I tend to just go with the home team. I'm going to pick the Lions here.
I'm going to go against the grain. I'm going to take the Redskins in this one, and I'm taking them because how bad the Lions' pass defense is. They're giving up a league-leading 17 pass TDs on the season. That is 2.8 TDs per game. Seriously, Keith, 2.8. Kirk Cousins, he's had, I think, 3 out of the last 4 games multi-TD games. The offense is coming alive. We saw Matt Jones have an incredible 100-plus all-purpose yard game the other day. And I even like Deshaun Jackson this week as a wide receiver, a strong one, who should be able to get a score. So get those guys active in your fantasy. I like the Lions too. I mean, Matt Stafford's been solid. It doesn't matter who he's played, he's been solid. So I think you keep starting him. You keep starting Marvin Jones, and certainly Golden Tate. He's back on fantasy radars. I know a lot of people were advising to dump him, and it made sense. But hopefully you said, I'm going to stash him on the bench because we've got many weeks of football ahead of us, and now you can get him back active again, certainly as a wide receiver 3 and as a flex play. Their running back situation with the Lions is disconcerting. Zach Zenner actually was pretty good last week. If you were desperate, you could start him. He certainly, if he is the starter and Theo Riddick's not back, he certainly could push for 100 all-purpose yards. And Justin Forsett, I don't know what his deal is last week. He only got about 5 touches, and he did nothing with them. He just needs time to acclimate to the offense. But Keith, I'm going to take the Redskins on the road.
All right, very valid points. Very valid points.
And the slightly better defense.
Yeah, it's the two teams are just really close. It's like what they do well, and what they do bad, they both do bad. The Raiders at the Jaguars. The Jaguars having a pretty impressive win in Chicago, in my opinion. Not so much for the fact that the amount of points that they put up, but the fact that they were down in the fourth quarter and managed to come back and win on the road. That's not nothing in the NFL. The Raiders, on the other hand, losing at home a division game to the Kansas City Chiefs, 26-10. The Raiders continue to be a Jekyll and Hyde. You just don't know what you're going to get out of them any given week. Looking at how statistically these teams break down, the Raiders are better offensively. They're better. They run the ball better. They score more points. Defensively, though, that's where Jacksonville has the upper hand. But scoring defense is not as much as of a separation as I would hope. You're trying to pick this game. The Raiders give up a ton of yards on defense. They turn it into almost 28 points per game given up. I don't like West Coast teams traveling east. I'm going to take the Jacksonville Jaguars to win this game at home.
This is a tough game to call, and it's a tough game to call because the last time the Raiders made this trip was to play the Baltimore Ravens a couple weeks back, and I believe the Raiders won that game.
They did.
Their defense came out, played well. The offense played good enough. So I don't discount them from being able to compete with the Jaguars just because of the long trip. But what I do like from a fantasy football perspective is many of the players on both teams, Derek Carr, Amari Cooper, Michael Crabtree, over on the Jaguar side, because the Raiders defense is so fantasy football friendly. Blake Bortles is a start this week, as is Allen Robinson and Julius Thomas, for that matter. And T.J. Yeldon, keep this under your hat. I'm going to look at it a little bit more, but I think he's going to be a deep sleeper in this one because they've actually been pretty kind to the running back position. And T.J. Yeldon seems to be the guy that should be able to take advantage of this. In the end, Keith, it's a tough game to call because the Jaguars defense, I was sort of giving them a hard time to start the season, if only because they didn't live up to the preseason billing that everybody had on them. But they're starting to play a lot better football. This will be a true challenge for them, and if they can pull it off, it could be time to look at them differently. I'm going to go ahead and take the Jaguars in this as well.
They got momentum on their side too, winning their last two.
They do.
The New Orleans Saints traveled to the Kansas City Chiefs. The Saints last week with impressive 41-38 win against Carolina. At home, it was only impressive because they hung on for dear life and managed to just outlast the Carolina Panthers. They were up big. That was the game they should never have allowed the Panthers to come back in. And the Chiefs, on the other hand, going to Oakland and winning a big interdivisional game on the road, 26-10. So, yeah, they were coming off a bye, but the week before that, they went into Pittsburgh and blew out the Steelers. I'm sorry, they got blown out by the Steelers 43-14. So to come back off the bye and put that kind of performance, that says something about a team's moxie. The Saints going on the road, they don't like playing outside the Superdome. They just don't. And even last week in the Superdome, they showed a tremendous amount of chokeability there. The Chiefs, I think, are much better than their early returns have given. I'm taking the Chiefs at home.
I like the Chiefs at home, too, and it's been statistically proven on the fantasygreek.com. If you follow us, you're familiar with our analytics page. We looked back at some of the performance numbers of Drew Brees, and we're able to point out to you the reality is that he just doesn't play well on the road. You might as well take a touchdown away from him every time he goes outside of the Superdome. So we know that the Chiefs will have that in their favor. They'll be playing on grass. And the other thing that I think goes in their favor is the fact that they're a run-first offense that will run through Spencer Ware and Jamal Charles probably the entire game, except maybe towards the end as they wear down the Saints. Maybe we'll see Alex Smith make a few tosses and throw a couple TDs. We'll see. But from a fantasy perspective, Chiefs players, I love them. I mentioned Spencer Ware. He's one of our top starts this week. I think you have to start Jamal Charles. Travis Kelce, as usual, is a TE1. Jeremy Maclin, get him in your lineup as a wide receiver 2, wide receiver 3, or flex play, depending on the size of your team. I might even consider the Chiefs defense in this one only because, as I mentioned, the Saints do struggle a little bit more on the road. For the Saints, start Drew Brees. Mark Ingram is solid. Might be more of a flex play this week, but you can play him as an RB2. And then the receivers, you keep going with those guys, sort of comparing them to the other people on your roster, and you take the best people you got, and you plug and play them. With the exception of Brandon Cooks, he's a weekly must start. But I'm going to take the Chiefs at home as well.
The Buffalo Bills travel to the Miami Dolphins in a classic AFC East matchup. You can almost hear the cries coming from Lake Erie. Squish the fish. Just like the early 90s, right, guys? Except the fact that the Dolphins stink. I don't care about them the way that they whooped up on Pittsburgh last week. This team has got a long way to go. The Bills, Jim, did you know that the Bills are leading the NFL in point differential so far this season?
I did not know that.
They've a grand total of plus 59. That's 1 point better than the New England Patriots. That's 3 points better than the Minnesota Vikings, and 7 points better than the Dallas Cowboys. They're ranked 4th in the 87 Sports Fans Power Rankings, which was published on our Facebook page the other day. The Dolphins are they're a nice story last week. Jay Ajayi went off big. If you happen to have him in your starting lineup, kudos to you. Tip of the cap, sir. But the fact of the matter is that the Bills' defense only is giving up about 17 points per game. They are giving up about, on average, 103 yards on the ground. But the Dolphins are giving up 147 on average, and the Bills run the ball fairly well. I'm taking the Bills to go into Miami and spoil a lot of South Beach dinners. Bills.
I'm going to take them too, and for many of the reasons that you gave, and the big part is defense. They're one of the best defenses around. This was a defense that, as I mentioned last week, again, run out, look at who's on your waiver wire. I found them in one of my leagues. They happen to be in second in terms of overall fantasy points for defenses. And I thought to myself, why isn't this unit on my team? And immediately picked them up. You should be able to ride them out for most of the rest of the season, except maybe against the Patriots. But that's just, is it one game left? I think they've already played once. But whatever the case, you should be able to ride them the rest of the season. They should control this game. So besides the fact that JJ had a great week last week, it may not be the best week to play him. I'm not discouraging you to not play him, but he could be a little bit off. So I would view him more as a low-end RB2, maybe a flex play. I'd rather play a wide receiver, especially in a PPR league if I can. Jarvis Landry remains a must-start, whether it's a wide receiver 2, wide receiver 3, depending on the size of your team. And over for the Bills, LaShawn McCoy is the ultimate must-start. However, the news today, he was removed from practice with a hamstring injury, and it's still unclear whether he's going to play. If he does not, Mike Gillislee is going to get the nod. Mike would make for a reasonable substitution if you're scrambling to try and find somebody to fit the bill. If you have LaShawn McCoy, I would handcuff him immediately. I don't think Tyrod Taylor's a bad play. He's more of a low QB1, high-end QB2, especially in 2-quarterback leagues. And I think Robert Woods, he's sort of this unfounded gem. He's just not a sexy player. He'll get you 60 to 80 yards, and you're hoping for a TD. I think this weekend he's going to do it again, just as he did it last weekend. Bills on the road.
The Baltimore Ravens travel to the New York Jets, and be ready, guys. Just be ready. It's the Geno Smith alarm. That's right, kids. Remember all of the angst and hand-wringing over whether Ryan Fitzpatrick was going to come back to the Jets or not because they absolutely could not roll into the season with Geno Smith? Well, now the Jets season is such a tire fire that Geno Smith actually looks attractive again. It's funny what happens in 6 weeks. The Jets' offense has been deplorable. only scoring 15.8 points per game. But you want to talk about what's really bugging them? That defense is giving up almost 4 touchdowns per game. You can't pin this all on Fitz. He's been bad. You can't defend that kind of play. But there's bigger issues on this Jets team than what you see at the quarterback position. The Ravens fired their offensive coordinator last week, turned into a 27-23 loss at the Giants. No real semblance of anything really going on with the Ravens. The Jets last week on Monday Night Football getting blown out by the Arizona Cardinals in Arizona, 28-3. Statistically wise, the Ravens score more. The Ravens allow less. I don't think Geno Smith is enough to turn the tide here. Even though the Jets are home, I'm taking the Ravens on the road.
This game is really ugly, and it's ugly for some of the things that you mentioned, Keith, especially if Geno Smith gets a start, which I don't think is going to happen. I think it will be Ryan Fitzpatrick. But on the Ravens side, they've been hit with injuries, especially on defense. So it makes me very concerned for the Ravens in terms of, can they or can they not win this game? Oh, and Joe Flacco's hurt too, apparently. That's something that people will need to keep in mind. I suppose my opinion as to who's going to win is a little bit more guarded, but let's start with from the fantasy perspective. If Joe Flacco is healthy, and I know that's a huge if. Well, Terrence West is an automatic start. At a minimum is an RB2, regardless of who's quarterback. But in terms of the wide receivers, whether it be Dennis Pitta, whether it be Steve Smith, whether it be if Steve Smith is out, whether it be what's his name, Aiken.
Kamar.
Amar Aiken, thank you. It's again all going to depend on whether Joe Flacco is healthy. If he's not healthy, I would sort of shy away from all these guys. If he's healthy, then go ahead and start them as you would. For the Jets, I want Ryan Fitzpatrick to play because if Jimmy Smith misses this game, it looks great for Brandon Marshall, and it looks great for Ryan Fitzpatrick. This is a Ravens team that's very stout against the rush, which makes Matt Forte a tough play. But against the pass, they're struggling a little bit. And last week we saw what happened when Jimmy Smith went down to injury and Odell Beckham Jr. just lit up the gridiron for 200-plus yards and was it 1-2 TDs, whatever. It was plenty. So, you kind of want Ryan Fitzpatrick to start. If he doesn't, all bets are off. Thank God they have the 1 o'clock game, so you at least get to find out whether it's Ryan or Geno. If it's Ryan, I think you go ahead and you play Brandon Marshall because he's got a great matchup. I would have put him on our must-starts, but this question of what's going to happen with Ryan Fitzpatrick is what held me back. But in terms of a winner, Keith, I don't know. This is a tough one. I want to take the Ravens on the road. I really, really do. I really, really do. I'm going to take the Jets at home.
All righty then. The Minnesota Vikings travel to the Philadelphia Eagles in a battle of... Now, these two teams at the 87 Sports Fans Power Rankings, Minnesota Vikings are number 1, and the Philadelphia Eagles are number 6. So this is going to be a fantastic game, folks. But the strength of these two teams, really, is the Vikings' defense is... Well, it's pretty much lights out. The Vikings are allowing 12.6 points per game. The Eagles, though, only 15.6, but that's with giving up 24 to Detroit and 27 in the last 2 weeks. So what were they doing before that? Pretty lights out as well. So which defense are we going to see here? What's the real Eagles defense? I think the truth is really in the middle. If this game was being played in Minnesota, I would pick the Vikings hands down. But the Eagles, they're on a 2-game losing streak, but they lost by 1. They lost by a touchdown on the road. Two tough games against Detroit and Washington. They're in there. They're fighting. They're coming home now. They're coming back to Pennsylvania. I'm going to pick Philly to give the Vikings their first loss of the year.
There's no way I am going against the Minnesota Vikings. They are the number 1 defense.
Chicken.
They do things when nobody expects it. Defensive touchdowns. They do everything. And this is going to be a defensive battle, low-scoring game, one of the lowest-scoring games of the week. So it's really hard to find fantasy players that you like. Certainly, I wouldn't go with Sam Bradford. Certainly, I wouldn't go with Carson Wentz. Jordan Matthews is one of our recommended sit-ems. I think Zach Ertz is sort of a borderline TE1. There's several tight ends who are sort of have that same ranking, and really what matters is whether or not they score a TD, and I'm not sure that he will, because it's going to be no surprise the Vikings are going to defend him. And then Ryan Matthews, it's a tough game for him. I think if you have him, you have to sort of view him as a low-end RB2 simply based on the volume. On the side of the Vikings, I like their play is a little bit better. Stephon Diggs I like a little bit better than Jordan Matthews, but not a lot. He's more of a wide receiver 3 this week with some upside. Jerick McKinnon, Matt Asiata, I'd rather not have either. But if you had to play either one, why not? Because you know what, they're going to get fed the football. This is an ugly game. If I had to, play players from this, I would rather not. But I'm taking the Vikings, Keith. I think you are dead wrong. This Vikings team, they're the real deal.
Chicken. The Indianapolis Colts travel to the Tennessee Titans in an AFC South matchup. And who would have thought that at the Week 7 we'd be talking about the Titans head coaching position as the most secure in the AFC South? But it is. Looking at these teams statistically, offensively, the Titans run the ball better. The Colts, obviously, with Andrew Luck, pass the ball a little better, but the Titans are no slouch in the passing game. The Colts, though, score more points, 26.7 to 20 per game. On defense, though, the Colts are just abysmal. They're giving up 117.7 games on average on the ground. The Titans, on the other hand, less than 89 yards per game. The Colts are also surrendering 29 points per game. So being on the road, a division game, I just don't see them coming out of Tennessee with a win. I'm going to take the Titans.
This is another one of those tough games because the Titans, their defense has been pretty good, but it's also floundered at times. And you'd say the same thing about the Colts, and even their offense. So I kind of look at this game as which one of these quarterbacks is in the best position to succeed? And the one that is in the best position to succeed, from my vantage point, is Marcus Mariota. This kid has been on fire the last 2 weeks. He's throwing the football to anybody who's open. And the thing that helps him greatly is DeMarco Murray, who has the number one I don't know that he has the number one matchup, but he's our number one running back this week. If you drafted him, God bless you, because so many of us were scared away given his prior injury history and given the fact that he floundered last year. But if you drafted him, then you are reaping the rewards, and he is a must-start. Marcus Mariota is a low-end QB1 this week. You should enjoy him for the rest of the season. He's got a couple of tough matchups, but he should be good otherwise. I would stay away from the Titans' receiving group, except maybe Delaney Walker, if only because it's just even Kendall Wright last week having that great game doesn't suddenly put him on the fantasy map because he could easily disappear. So I would sort of avoid them until further notice. On the flip side for the Colts, Andrew Luck, he's a QB1. And if you have him, you probably are going to start him. I think this is a week, though, to keep your expectations tempered. Frank Gore is a low-end RB2. I love T.Y. Hilton in general, but this is not going to be an easy matchup for him because, quite frankly, everybody's going to see him coming. Now, I know Dwayne Allen is out this week, and he could be out for the foreseeable future. A lot of people have been talking about picking up Jack Doyle. And, look, he's a TD-dependent tight end. So if he gets you 30, 40 yards and no score, that's, it's words of caution. I don't know that this game is necessarily the best for him. But if you're looking around your waiver wire and it's very empty, he's not a bad guy to pick up and play this week. But I'm going to take the Titans at home.
All right. The San Diego Chargers travel to the Atlanta Falcons. The Falcons' offense has just been on fire, just electrocuting, scoring 33 points per game. The Chargers, no slouch themselves, 28.8, but they look paltry compared to the Falcons right now. Phillip Rivers is having a decent year. The Chargers are throwing for 263, but the Falcons are throwing for 329.5 a game. And you look at defensively, they're very even all the way around. The Chargers give up 25.8. The Falcons slightly more, 27.7. But that's not enough to make me say, oh, this is hands down going one way or the other. Falcons went into Denver 2 weeks ago, came away with a 23-16 win. They go into Seattle, a tough place to play, if not the toughest place to play in the league, and they lose by 2. The Falcons are home against the Chargers. Look, I would love to see Phillip Rivers and San Diego be successful this year. This is not the game that they get right on in Atlanta. I'm taking the Falcons.
So we've got the Titans-Colts game, which is going to be considered a high-scoring game. Then the Lions-Redskins, a high-scoring game. Then the Jaguars-Raiders, high-scoring game. Then even higher than that, the Chiefs-Saints game. And this is the shootout of the week, Falcons versus Chargers. Fire up your fantasy rosters with players from both these teams. It's going to be 55-plus points more than likely. And Matt Ryan, the one quarterback that I panned in the preseason because he's been very mediocre. I mean, he has not really put together a great body of work leading into the season. He has been fantastic. You can't bench him. I mean, he destroyed the Seahawks, the Broncos, and he's going to do the same thing to the Chargers this week. Julio Jones should have a big game. Devonta Freeman should have a big game. Get Tevin Coleman in your lineup somehow. Mohamed Sanu is a wide receiver 3 flex play. And then flip it over to the Chargers. Phillip Rivers needs to be on fantasy gridirons. Melvin Gordon, Travis Benjamin. I love Hunter Henry. I've been going out of my way to try and pick up that guy and get him onto every team I can because I went back and looked, and he's one of the top tight ends over the past 4 weeks. And if you narrow it down to when Antonio Gates came back, he's still one of the top tight ends in the last 2 weeks. So you should be playing this kid every single week. In terms of the wide receivers for the Chargers, like I said, Travis Benjamin. I do like Terrell Williams. And even Inman is sort of a sleeper, but he's only a consideration in deep 16-team leagues, Keith. But I'm taking the Falcons, and they're one of the teams that is going to contend for the NFC Championship.
All right. Tampa Bay travels to San Francisco. San Francisco made a change of quarterback. Some guy named Kaepernick, maybe you've heard of him. Went back under center, went to Buffalo, and got thrashed 45-16. The Buccaneers were on a bye last week, but the last time we saw them, they were in Carolina winning a division game 17-14. So now here we go. They go out west after a bye, plenty of time to prepare. They've watched what Kaepernick did last week. And, looking at this team statistically, there's not enough on either way. The only thing that makes me want to pick the Buccaneers is that on defense, they are holding teams to less than 32% on third down. The 49ers, on the other hand, are up over 43%. That's just not winning football. I'm going to take the Tampa Bay on the road just because San Francisco just doesn't have much going on.
Keith?
Yeah.
So who did you take? I'm sorry.
Tampa Bay on the road just because the San Francisco 49ers just don't have much going on.
And I agree. Defensively is where that's where they struggle. This should be a moderately decent scoring, even though the Carlos Hyde thing really kind of screws things up in general. But certainly makes it more plausible that we'll see Colin Kaepernick throwing the football a lot more. So let's start with the Buccaneers. If you follow our site and, again, hang out at our fantasy football analytics section, you'll see our strength of schedule. We pointed out to you that Mike Evans and Jameis Winston are 2 players you want to target in trades or go get them because their rest of season schedule, at least based on today's fantasy points allowed, are very favorable, including this game here. I don't like Jameis Winston as much as a fantasy play as I do Mike Evans, but they're still good. Doug Martin, as I mentioned earlier in the show, he's not going to play this week, and he may not play for a few weeks. Jacquizz Rodgers is a must-start this week. He's a solid RB2. Pick him up and flex him, find a way to get him into your lineups. And a deep sleeper this week is going to be Adam Humphries. I know he hasn't been, people don't get very excited about him, but the reality is Vincent Jackson's done for the season, and somebody else is going to step up in sort of that second receiving or third offensive role, and it's probably going to be Humphries. And then if you flip it over to the 49ers, without Carlos Hyde, I do like Mike Davis, but not as much as some of the other running backs to fill in. it's going to be on Colin Kaepernick, a guy that I might have said here early yesterday might throw for 1 TD and might rush for 1 TD. Now looks like he could easily get 2 TDs somehow, whether it be passing, rushing, or 2 pass, and then maybe even a third. Because without Carlos Hyde, they've got to do something with the football, and he's going to throw it a ton to one guy that came alive last week, Torrey Smith. He's one of our stardoms this week. Look at Torrey Smith as a wide receiver 3 or a flex play, depending on the size of your team, and start him up this week. Take the Buccaneers on the road, Keith.
We're agreeing an awful lot lately.
Oh, are we really?
Just so you know.
Oh, I didn't realize that.
The only games we've picked differently so far is you're picking the Redskins and I'm picking the Lions, and you're picking the Jets and I'm picking the Ravens. Oh, and wait, you picked the Vikings and I picked the Eagles. So we got 3 games of difference.
Yeah,
I guess it's not bad.
No,
may have, and I'm not saying this until I think about it more. May have been an overreaction on my part. The New England Patriots travel to the Pittsburgh Steelers in a nice, classic AFC matchup. The Steelers, though, are going to be without Ben Roethlisberger. Landry Jones comes in under center. So that screams to me that they're going to lean heavily on Le'Veon Bell. And how do the Patriots match up defensively? Well, they're giving up less than 100 yards on the ground per game. Doesn't bode well. They're only giving up 15.2 points per game. Tip your cat, really, to Matt Patricia and the Patriots defense, because they have done a fantastic job weathering the storm while Tom Brady was on suspension. They did what they had to do on their end of the football. The Steelers with Roethlisberger would be a whole different story. With Landry Jones under center, I don't see this ending well for the Steelers. I'm picking the Patriots on the road.
It's going to be ugly. And it's going to be ugly in Pittsburgh, and that's the thing that's sort of scary. The last time Jarvis Landry started for the Steelers, it did not go well for them, certainly in fantasy football. Le'Veon Bell is obviously going to be leaned upon heavily in this game. He's a must-start in daily fantasy football leagues. He'll likely be the most expensive player, and for good reason. He's going to probably touch the football 30 times, maybe 35 times. In terms of the other Steelers players, it's scary, and it's because we're going into sort of the unknown. We know that they're all going to be downgraded. I had Antonio Brown ranked number 22, and I'm actually going to move him up a little bit only because, for example, Steve Smith is banged up. Okay, so he's going to move up. Might move him up ahead of Stephon Diggs given the matchup. But he's more of a wide receiver too. The other receivers for the Steelers are just Sammy Coates. Hey, we were like, hey, pick him up off waivers last week. Now, boy, I don't know that I would want to start him certainly this week. So I would avoid him. Jesse James is sort of a sneaky play because he'll be a safety valve given that he's the tight end. So he might do some damage, but I'd prefer to bench him if I could this week. On the other side for the Patriots, I mean, Keith, who do you bench? I mean, every single player can do something on that field. So I like LeGarrette Blount is a solid RB2. He should score a touchdown this week. Tom Brady should get you 3 TDs at least. Edelman's been struggling. I know it's tough. I have him on one of my teams, and he's just driving me nuts because he's not doing anything. But I'm trying to stay the course, and I suggest you do too, unless you clearly have 3 players you could play ahead of him. Chris Hogan, I still think, is shaky, but in a 16-team league, I would give him a go as a flex. No questions asked. James White is a decent option as a low-end RB2 or a flex play. Did I miss? Oh, Gronkowski and Martellus Bennett. I think I have them as tight ends 1 and 2 or 1 and 3, something like that. Start those guys every single week. Patriots win in a landslide.
You said Jarvis Landry. You meant Landry Jones, correct?
I did mean Landry Jones.
Okay, just want to make sure. I assumed, but I just want to make sure.
I did. Sorry.
Did you know that in my dynasty league, the one that I continuously tout on this show, that both James White and Terrence West were both available in free agency?
You're kidding.
Nope.
Wow.
Guess who scooped them up? Just so you know. So, and I also was managed to scoop up Hunter Henry too. So, let me tell you something.
I'll need to get involved in this league so you get at least some competition.
Oh my gosh, I tell you, I was laughing out loud at everybody last week anyway. We won't talk about
God.
these weeks. All right, where are we? Seattle at Arizona. This is an intriguing game. You look at the Cardinals blowing out the Jets. Some concerns about Carson Palmer's hammy. He says it was cramping. No big deal. It was a blowout. He came out. The Seahawks winning against the Falcons at home last week, 26-24. Previous game before that, they were on a bye, but the previous game in Week 4, they beat the Jets in New York, 27-17. So this may not be the Seahawks team that won the Super Bowl as far as performance-wise, but they're still pretty good, especially on defense. They're only giving up 15.6 points per game, only 74.6 yards on the ground per game. They're holding teams to less than 30% on third downs defensively. The questions that I raise are, can the offense, keep up? And not that Arizona's going to score a lot of points, but Arizona's not, backing into the playoffs by any stretch. They're going to figure this out before the season's through. And, they're a pretty good team offensively. So even if Arizona manages to score 13 points, is this Seattle offense capable of scoring 13 points against a pretty good Cardinals defense? Yeah, they give up 104 per game on the ground. That's a point of concern. But they're only giving up 191 through the air. Something's got to give. This is probably the matchup of the week, other than the Vikings-Eagles game there. This is one that you have to watch with bated breath. It's a Sunday night game. Arizona being at home, it's tough to go against the home team here. But I just, man, it's a real tough game to pick. I'm going to take the home team. I am, and I feel dirty about it, but I'm going to take Arizona.
Did you say you felt dirty about it?
I do, because my gut's telling me to pick the Seahawks, but I'm taking the home team.
Oh, it's tough being you.
Sometimes.
That's for certain.
Sometimes.
So the one thing about this game that I absolutely don't like is I don't like Carson Palmer. Everything about this game says bench him, and that's exactly what I would do. He hasn't played well, and I know I've been telling people coming out of the bye he should play better, and I still think that's true. But this game here, he struggled. It was the David Johnson show, which is the only thing that could sort of be a saving matter in this. But I would probably sit him. Larry Fitzgerald, I think, makes for a decent wide receiver 2, wide receiver 3, because I think he's had success before against this defense. He's just a player that won't be denied. And if you pick on Richard Sherman long enough, you'll be successful. John Brown could be a wide receiver 3 flex play. David Johnson, I would keep playing him. I don't care what defense it is. He is that good of a player and that good for you in fantasy football. The Seahawks, this is going to be challenging. And it's a good Cardinals defense. I think they match up well. I still like Jimmy Graham. I do not like Doug Baldwin. I would try and avoid him because of his matchup with Patrick Peterson. And I still like Christine Michael. May not be a great game, but you can't sit him because he's going to be a productive player for this team. As far as who wins this game, like you, I will stick with the Cardinals at home. It's just a tough place to beat such a good defense. Cardinals win.
All right, last game of the week, the Monday night game, the Houston Texans travel to the Denver Broncos. You watched Houston last week on Sunday night, and they played the Colts. And they won 26-23. But in my opinion, that win is purely on the Colts. That was awful. The Colts were up big. Houston had nothing going offensively. No rhythm, nothing to speak of, no sense of excitement, nothing to build confidence on, and the Colts let them back into that game and let them ultimately take control. The Broncos, on the other hand, were losing to the Chargers in San Diego, 21-13. Statistically wise, these teams are pretty even. The Broncos do manage to score a little bit more than 5 points per game. The Texans run the ball a little bit better. On defense, the Texans give up about a field goal more per game. But other than that, there's really no discerning difference statistically wise. You just have to go with the eyeball test. And while the Broncos and Texans, ironically, are very similar as far as the question marks about their quarterbacks, it's where are you going to go with? And I'm going to go with the home team on a Monday night game, just like I did with Arizona. I'm picking the Broncos.
And I'm going to take the Broncos too, because there's one of two ways to look at this game. It's either going to be exactly the way that I think both you and I are looking at it, is that the Broncos have a very good defense. They're going to step up. They're going to the Texans have a one-dimensional rushing offense, and it's all Lamar Miller, nobody else. And as far as their passing offense, they know Brock Osweiler. They were with him for 5 years, and half of last season he was the starter. It's not as if things are going to change. But the other way to view this is that Brock Osweiler knows them well. So he knows the weaknesses of the defense. He knows what to pick on. And that's tougher for me to swallow based on what we've seen from Brock Osweiler so far this season. His body of work has not been good. His chemistry with DeAndre Hopkins, it's difficult. It's not, I think they have 2 or 3 TDs together when they should have 6 or 8 by now. Certainly he should be well over 500 yards receiving, and he's not. And even adding Will Fuller to the mix, it helped at the beginning of the season. And I know Will Fuller's been struggling a little bit with injuries, but it's not continuing. So I'm going to stick with the Broncos in this one. It should be a terrible homecoming for Brock Osweiler. Their next time around, I think, will be better. But this time around, I think you have to stick with the Broncos, and they're getting Gary Kubiak back, which I really do think will be uplifting for their morale. Broncos win.
All righty. So, and with that, we are out of time. For Jim Sarantias, the Fantasy Greek himself, from thefantasygreek.com. Head over there during the week, folks, and check out all the up-to-date player news and rankings. Hit him up on Twitter at the Fantasy Greek with the hashtag AskTFG. That's AskTFG, and he will get back to you with timely lineup advice. For Jim Sarantias, I am Keith Greek from 87 Sports Fans. We're here every Wednesday night, typically at 10 p.m. Eastern Time when the Cubs are not in the postseason. Good luck this week, and may the odds be forever in your favor.